I've been asked to answer some questions about my new book, Seven Wondrous Words. I'll just go through the questions and I'll try to give an answer. So, the first question is: you've just had Seven Wondrous Words, Christ's final word on the cross, published. You mentioned that you used the materials from 7 sermons to prepare this book. When did you decide that you'd preach on these 7 words of Christ from the cross over a period of 7 years on Good Friday? Well, in my preaching ministry, I normally preach in series. I don't like facing a coming Sunday and casting about for something to preach. I find it a lot easier to preach verse by verse through a book, and so with each coming Lord's Day, I know exactly what it is I'm going to be preaching. Well, it's sort of the same with preaching each year on Good Friday. Rather than casting about and wondering what I should preach each successive year, I was drawn to the idea of preaching a sort of series on these 7 sayings from the cross. And that meant that at least for 7 years, my texts were chosen for every Good Friday. Now, I suppose it's a bit of a pragmatic approach, but it does also benefit the congregation in that they're definitely going to hear sermons on each of those passages, even if the pastor might prefer to find something else. The second question: how did you reach the conclusion that these 7 sermons should serve as material for the manuscript of a book? Well, there's a tradition of writing books on the 7 sayings from the cross. And one of the most helpful books for me as I was preparing the original sermons was Arthur Pink's The 7 Sayings of Our Savior from the Cross. I had a look around, and it didn't appear that any Reformed authors have done anything similar, at least not recently, and at least not in English. There may be some stuff out there in Dutch. So it seemed to me that there should be something out there for English-speaking Reformed believers going through these 7 sayings of our Savior from the cross. The third question: you chose to describe the words of Christ on the cross as wondrous. Why would that be an apt description when some of the sayings of Christ on the cross are filled with pain, suffering, and sorrow? Well, what our Savior experienced certainly wasn't wonderful for him. He was plunged not only into physical suffering, but worse, into an experience of the infinite wrath of God against our sin. He experienced our hell. That's terrible. It's more terrible than any of us can imagine. However, what's wondrous is that he did it for us. He did it in our place. He did it so that I'll never have to. His sufferings on the cross, reflected in the sayings, remind us of God's incredible love and grace. And that's what makes it all wondrous. Fourth question here: the book is filled with theological carefulness and heartfelt comfort and encouragement. In the book, you seem to want to teach our minds and to reach our hearts, as it were. Assuming that is intentional, how do you manage finding that balance in your writing? Well, I guess that's reflective of my approach to preaching, really. It's also reflective of what I read. The way I write and the way I preach reflects what's been most influential in terms of my reading. When I was a university student, I providentially encountered the Puritans, and I've been reading them ever since. The Puritans have been hugely influential on me. With guys like Thomas Watson, you get the theological precision, but then you also get the experiential warmth. The Puritans, they held forth Reformed theology, which informs the mind, but they also showed how that theology addresses the heart. Now, I don't try to imitate the Puritans. I don't think that would be a wise or good thing to do, but I do try to follow their approach. Fifth question here: if there were one significant overall statement or point to the book, a thesis statement if you will, what would that be? Well, it's simply this: be more impressed with Christ. Be more impressed with Christ and what he's done for you on the cross. And the last question here: where can people purchase your book? Well, you can find it at the website of the publisher, The Study, and that's the study-books.com. The study-books.com.